Okay folks, this is the third of the 3 videos which are part of the first homework for neurobiology. So make sure that before you try the first neurobiology homework you have watched this video, you've watched the video on the cerebral cortex, and you've watched the first of the 3 videos which is about types of neural pathway. This topic is about memory. I have tried to collect all the information you need to know on the boards. What I will do very briefly is stand aside and let you pause the video so that you can hopefully start to have a wee read at what's there. I'm going to talk you through it, maybe embellish some of the details a little bit, but to be honest with you, everything you need to know is on the board behind me. So as I said, this is your opportunity to pause. I'll stand out the way so you can definitely see it all. But as I said, I'll talk you through it anyway. So you might want to pause, just try and have a wee read at this, maybe even screenshot it if you're on your phone, it means you can zoom in on it. The handout that I give you out will be very similar to this anyway, but you know, that's the information there. Okay, so the idea about memory, what a memory actually is, could be one of 3 things. It could be a past experience that you have, it could be a piece of knowledge that you have gained, or it can be a thought. All of those things could be defined as memories. What we are going to look at initially is the idea of how a memory is formed, and it goes through this 3-stage process. It's encoded by your brain. It's basically taken from the short-term memory into the long-term memory. It's stored after that, and then obviously that memory, to be any use, has to be able to be retrieved again. So it's stored somewhere, but then you try and remember your best friend's name, you think about it, you retrieve that information, right? So that's what a memory is. That's what having that knowledge, it's only useful if you can retrieve it. So you have this pattern of encoding, that is the event turning into something the brain can understand, the storage of that information, perhaps after the brain's judged whether it's useful or not, and then once it's stored, the ability to retrieve it, right? So this goes into a little bit more detail about that process of encoding, storage, retrieval. The first type of memory that you want to think about is what's called your sensory memory, right? So what that basically is all of your sensory organs, so your eyes, your ears, your nose, your mouth, everything else, they are receiving information from the environment, and all the information that is being detected is being stored for a very, very short period of time, just a few seconds. So everything you can see, everything you can hear is being recorded. But of course, if I was to say to you, if you were all standing in front of me in the class and I was to say to you, in a week's time, what colour was my tie, you wouldn't necessarily be able to remember it. It was for a few seconds, it was stored as a memory, but your brain has not considered that to be important. Hopefully the things I'm saying, you can remember that the colour of the tie I had on would be filtered out in some way. So we're going to look at how that process happens. But this idea that we start off with sensory memory, which is all the information gets stored very, very briefly, just for a few seconds. So that's what that says, just in case you can't quite make it out. It says all visual and auditory input stored for a few seconds. So we start off sensory memory, right? Then a decision is made. So the brain makes this decision that, okay, he told us about types of memory, so that seems like that's important, so I'm going to push that into what's called short-term memory. But, he's got a slightly grey and black tie on, that's not important, that's just going to fire straight out, that's just going to be discarded. That no longer exists in the brain anymore. Your brain has already discounted that. The chances are, now that I've talked about the colour of my tie, if I was to ask you in a week's time, do you remember that video you watched of me talking about memory, what colour was my tie? You're going to say, oh, it was grey and black. But that's because we've talked about it. So it's the brain has switched from deciding, well, that's going to be discarded, to actually, you've now remembered what colour my tie is, and we're going to talk about why that is in a little minute. Anyway, so your short-term memory is where the first lot of information that your brain thinks might be of use gets put. It is a limited capacity for a short period of time. Now that limit is around about 7 different items of information. Okay, if I was to give you a 7-digit number, that is about the maximum number of numbers you can remember at any one time. Right, that's a limit to your short-term memory. What it does say there though, as you can just about make out, it says it can be improved by chunking. Now, I'll write that bigger just so you can sort of see what the word is. Obviously, you can hear what I'm saying, but chunking is a method by which you can remember things. Things can be, and the amount that your short-term memory can hold can be improved by chunking. And chunking, the best example of chunking is, see when you're shown a phone number, not necessarily a Motherwell phone number, but a phone number like a Glasgow phone number has 7 numbers. You might think 554166, right? 554166. Now, the way that you would normally break up a phone number is you would break it up into 554, so like 0141, 5541656, right? These spaces, chunk, chunk, chunk. That's an easier way to keep something in your mind. You'll know this yourself. If somebody tries to tell you a number, you might think, if somebody gives you a 6-digit number, you might think of it in terms of 2 3s. And those chunks will stay in your short-term memory more easily, because instead of trying to remember 6 individual numbers, you're remembering 2 sets of 3 numbers. And so your brain can cope with that a little bit more easily. That's what chunking is. Okay, so short-term memory can be improved by chunking. Just trying to remember that that's the relationship that they have. Something else that's worth mentioning as well, we have this, what's called the working memory model. The working memory model states that the short-term memory can actually store some cognitive tasks, so some things your brain can almost do without realising you're doing it. Anybody who, you might speak to somebody who's been driving for a long time, for example, you can find that you do an awful lot of things without necessarily thinking about them. Your short-term memory can be involved in some very, very basic physical cognitive tasks that don't need to be stored in the long-term memory. That's something to be aware of. It's called the working memory model. Okay, so story so far. Your sensory memory, so all the information that you have in front of you stays in there for just a few seconds. The majority of it gets discarded, but anything that the brain deems worthy to put into short-term memory, it will do. There is a limit to the amount of information and the amount of time that the short-term memory can hold information for, so you can improve that by chunking. And then we have a second decision the brain makes. The brain might choose to then discard some of that information before it goes into long-term memory. And when it gets into long-term memory, also known as LTM, that's it become an actual piece of knowledge. It's become an actual thought that you have and you can keep. It's become an actual piece of information your brain has stored. Long-term memory has unlimited capacity, and that's very, very hard to prove. But as yet, there is absolutely no evidence of any human who's ever had a limit to the amount of things that can be remembered. It appears to be that through your entire life, you can continue to store things in your long-term memory, which would suggest it's unlimited, as far as we understand it. And it can hold information for a very long time, not necessarily forever. You may have forgotten, for example, the person you sat next to in primary 3. You might not have, I think. But yeah, the person you sat next to in primary 3 would have been something you would have known in primary 3. It would have been a long-term memory. It would have been, you'd have known it a couple of days. You'd have known on Sunday night who you were going to go be in and sit next to on the Monday morning, or you'd have known at the end of the summer holidays who you were sitting next to in primary 3, right? So it was in your long-term memory. Do you necessarily remember now? Possibly not. So things can be discarded from your long-term memory. Of course they can. You don't remember absolutely everything you've ever remembered in your whole life. But you had the potential for it to have been stored in there. This is probably, of what we've talked about so far, these 3 words are about the most important thing, or the most complex thing, are the 3 ways in which we can increase our ability to take things from the short-term memory and put them into the long-term memory. And these 3 things can be quite useful for studying, actually. If you've got a set of notes in front of you, it would be brilliant if you could just remember exactly what they said, right? Because then you could just sit in an exam and, oh, what did that page 3, no, what did the third paragraph in page 3 say? And then you can remember what it said, you know all the answers, right? That's not really the way it works. But there are ways to improve the transfer of information from short-term memory to long-term, and reduce the amount that gets discarded. And those three ways that we talk about are rehearsal. Rehearsal is more or less what we did with the colour of my tie thing, because I kept repeating it, didn't I? I kept saying over and over again what the colour of my tie was. It's increasing the chance, increasing the exposure, and increasing the chance of it being stored in long-term memory. So rehearsal is pretty obvious. Organisation is the same. You know how we do a mind map at the end of every topic? That's a fantastic example of organisation. Very, very useful when attempting to move things into your long-term memory. If you can get things into a particular order or a particular structure that makes sense to you, then it's far more likely you're going to be able to remember more of that information if you organise it. So rehearsal just means kind of repeating things over and over again. Organisation is exactly the same, but it's not exactly the same, it's completely different. In the sense that you're just taking things and put them into a logical order, making them easier to remember. And then you also have elaboration. And elaboration is a fantastic way of remembering things. One of the strategies, if you're trying to remember somebody's name, for example, if you're introduced to 3 or 4 different people at the same time, it's very, very easy to forget all of their names. In fact, it's more than likely you will forget all of their names. One of the ways you can improve your chance of remembering somebody's name is if you remember something about them. So if you're introducing new people to somebody else and you say, well, this is David. Hi, David. A few days later, what was that guy's name again? But if you say, hi, this is David and he works at the post office, that added piece of information, that elaboration, you can then connect working at the post office with the name David, and it increases your chance of remembering the name. That's the idea of elaboration. So try and remember, perhaps by repeating, perhaps by organising these information, or perhaps by going into a little bit more detail about the 3 things, i.e. rehearsal, organisation, and elaboration. Those are the 3 ways in which we can improve the amount of information that moves from short-term memory to long-term memory, i.e. remember it, right? It's not really something that is remembered if it's only in our short-term memory. It will only be there for a very short period of time, hence the name. And there's a limit to the amount you can store in your short-term memory. This is the problem with, of course, an hour's worth of lesson, or in this case 12.5 minutes worth of video. This is why I'm constantly telling you to pause and rewind and watch it again, because I want you to repeat it, I want you to rehearse it, I want you to organise your information, and I think you should try and elaborate on things I'm saying. That's another reason why I'm not just going, this is the word, that's the word, that's the word. I'm trying to actually give you information to allow you to tie things together in your brain. And that's what I am trying to do to aid your memory. I've often thought this should be one of the first things we do in the course, because it is such a great study aid. In any case, so that's really everything that there is there. The only other thing that's mentioned, I've put in a little black cloud here next to the idea of retrieval. So that's about your body getting, once it's been stored and it's in long-term memory, how do you get it back out? Okay? And the way that we can do that is by using contextual cues. Now, all that means is if you have things which are related, information which is related to something else, it's easier to pull it out of your long-term memory. So remember that contextual cues can be used to improve long-term, to improve your ability to retrieve information from your long-term memory. Okay? So just to summarise, that's really all the information that I need for you to know about this, but we'll take it from the start. The idea of a memory, understand that memories can be past experiences, they can be knowledge, they can be thoughts. We have effectively 3 different levels of memory. Our sensory memory is this, all the information that's around us being taken in for a very short period of time, just a few seconds. The majority of that is discarded, but some of it is moved over to the short-term memory part of your brain. Short-term memory is very limited to only around 7 pieces of information, and again for a short period of time. A lot of the information from the short-term memory, before it gets to become an actual memory in the long-term memory, gets discarded. The way we can reduce the amount of discarded information is by rehearsing that information, by organising that information, and by elaborating on that information. If we can do those 3 things, we will reduce the amount that gets discarded and increase the amount of information that ends up in long-term memory. And then just what I started off by talking about was this idea of encoding. That is the idea of something which is physically happening in front of you becoming information that the brain can understand. It's then stored, and then your ability to retrieve that information once stored can be aided by the use of contextual cues. Okay? So that is the really, oh, I didn't mention chunking the second time round either, just in that summary there. Remember that chunking is a way, a strategy that can be used to improve your short-term memory. It can improve the amount of information your short-term memory can take in. So if you're trying to remember a number that you're trying to write down, let's say you're on the phone, somebody tells you a phone number. If somebody just says 07753242134, you're like, what? But if somebody says 0722345, it's a better way. Obviously if you write down, that's not really the same thing, but if you cut the same number into chunks, your short-term memory can handle that more easily, and that's what we call chunking. Okay, right. Once you've watched this video, this is this is the third of the 3 videos which are covered by the first of the 2 neurobiology homeworks. That's quite a lot of numbers. So there are only 2 homework exercises left. There's this one, this is now the 3rd video, so once you watch these 3 videos, you're happy with the content, you do that next video. I'm hoping to post that this afternoon or this evening. There is only 1 remaining homework. I will post that next week, so the first week of the Easter holidays. If you can get that done in that time, then you are basically, you've got that week, not free, because I fully expect you to be revising, but the course will be finished. We're 2 homeworks away from finishing the course. So once you've completed the homework exercise that I post today, you only have 1 remaining one, and then that would be us finish the course. Okay? Right, thanks for listening, folks.